Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm going to be painting a Dark Age Irish Warrior by Footsore Miniatures, and I think I'm going to start making this kind of a regular series here on the channel, where I paint some historical models I have lying around all in one sitting. And my goal for these videos will be to spend a little bit more time on some historical models, putting them up to a higher quality than I usually would for my tabletop historical miniatures, but also I'm not going to languish on these guys and spend a crazy amount of time on them like I might for a Games Workshop or Kingdom Death model, and it might give me an opportunity to ramble a bit about history because I am a big history buff. So anyways, sit back and enjoy as I walk you through how I painted this Dark Age Irish Warrior. So as I tend to do with all my historical models, I'm going to start by painting the skin tones. And I already realized I left a pretty bad seam along his leg there. These are some models I primed up about a year ago, and apparently I didn't do a great job cleaning them up. So forgive me for that seam line along his leg, but in the end I don't think it'll be all that noticeable. So I'm just starting off, and I'm using here the paint set by the new Scale 75 acrylic, artist acrylic set. And I'm starting off with kind of their dark burnt umber color as my base skin tone, getting a nice even coat. I really like this new paint set. In fact, my next video is going to be a review of this paint set, and hopefully I'll be able to go more in depth on the kind of strengths and weaknesses of this paint line. So here I took that dark brown color, mixed it in with some pink flesh, and I'm hitting about 75% of the skin area, only keeping the deep recesses, that very dark reddish brown. And as you can see, I'm keeping my paint very thin. It's a little bit above the consistency of a glaze, going over the layers multiple times. I think if you're going to spend time on anything on your historical models, spending time on skin is probably the best you can do. I always think that if you can get the face and hands of a model looking really nice, you can get away with some more sloppier techniques on the rest of your model. So here I'm now taking just that pure pink flesh, and I'm layering it up on the legs and on all the areas that I think will be catching a little bit of light. And so now I'm taking the golden skin, and I'm continuing my highlight process, again using really thin paint. I'm going to spend the most time, as I said before, on the skin, getting a nice smooth transition between the different colors, which is why I really do like this scale color line. It has about 6 colors. Just layer them one on top of another and actually get pretty seamless transitions without having to do any wet blending or anything like that. So now I am taking pale skin, and I'm highlighting just the areas I know that are catching light, the rounded areas of his calf, the top of his ankle. I'm going to be taking that and here hitting the back of his heel, places that I know will definitely be catching light. And now I've taken that pale skin tone and I mixed in a little bit of ivory in there to make an even paler color. And here I'm hitting the tops of the leg. I'm hitting his knuckles with this. I'm putting a little bit right beneath his eye. This is my second to last highlight. I do like to do a highlight of almost pure white on a few places around the model. But as you can see, this pale skin tone is very light, and I'm pretty much only just touching areas with it, making little dots. Even when I'm putting it on his leg, as you can see, I'm just hitting it with dots, using a kind of speckling technique here just to draw your eye. Since skin isn't perfectly smooth, just putting little dots of highest tones in areas where you know most of the light is catching is kind of pleasing to the eye. And once I'm satisfied with my highlights here, I'm taking a really watered down glaze of a crimson color that comes in the set, and I'm going to pretty much run it all over the skin. This will just help blend in all the various layers that we've laid down, and hopefully you won't see as stark of transitions. And with the skin done, we are now going to move on to painting his tunic. And I'm going to take a moment to talk about just how much I like these Footsore models, not only because I think they are actually pretty proportionate. Oftentimes I find 28mm models are kind of on the chunkier side. These ones actually seem pretty anatomically appropriate. And I especially like how the model isn't just your typical Dark Age Irish models of a bunch of nearly naked, shoeless guys with javelins and buckler shields. The range actually is quite a bit more diverse than that. They show some of that Norse influence that was definitely a part of Dark Age Ireland. Most people concentrate on the impact that the Vikings had on England, and they forget how influential they were also in Ireland, holding Dublin for quite a while, and in fact weren't really expelled until Brian Boru got rid of them. And so it's nice to see here we have some models with Dane axes and other gear that you would associate with the Vikings. So it's a nice kind of blend between those cultures. So what I'm going to do with this tunic is I'm just going to rough in the highlights and lowlights, not spending too much time blending. So here I just put a little bit of ivory into this moss color, and I'm just doing a rough highlight all around the tunic. Again, we're going to use some glazes to kind of draw the highlights and lowlights together. This is kind of my preferred method of painting historicals. We kind of just roughly highlight and then we glaze. We don't worry about doing a ton of layers. I save the layering for the skin tone. And we don't do any wet blending or anything like that. We just do quick and dirty highlights. And I'll show you, once you glaze it several times, it'll do a good job of bringing all those disparate colors together. So now I'm just going to take that same color. I'm going to hit even less of the area, only the places I really want light to be hitting. And I'm just going to roughly go over those areas all around the model, especially in those folds that you see here on the back of his tunic and at the top of his shoulders. Things like that. And then I'm going to take just a little bit of green and mix into some ivory and hit the really high highlights of this model. Places like the very edges of the folds in his tunic. Anywhere that I know light will be hitting, the top of his shoulders, his elbows, things like that. And if you notice, it's a pretty stark contrast to the paint around it. It kind of stands out. It doesn't look all that great. But again, we'll hit it with a glaze and it will look just fine here in a moment. One thing I also like to do is I'm taking that white too and I'm just drawing it across the folds just to show a little bit of texture to the cloth so you can kind of see the weave in the cloth. I think this actually looks really nice. I've been doing this on a lot of my historical models recently, and it's a good way to also kind of cover up the fact that you don't have really fine transitions. You do this scratch work along the model, and it distracts your eye from pretty drastic shifts in color. All right, so now I'm going to glaze over the entirety of the model with this moss green color. It's actually, I decided to go for a little bit lighter color than my original base coat. I wanted a little bit more green. So I'm just really watering this down, and then I'm wicking off any of the excess paint onto a paper towel. And then I'm just running it all across the model. And as you can see, it kind of tones down that really high contrast. There's an even quicker way of painting like this called sketching, which I'll probably do in another video, where you are really just sketching in you're doing one pass of pure white and pure black in the recesses and then glazing over it. And you can get some pretty good speed painting results that way. So anyways, there we have our highlights done. But now just to emphasize those low lights, I'm going to go and I'm going to take a purple. And I know a lot of people like to create shadows of greens with darker greens, or even with reds, using darker reds for the shadows. I instead, for both greens and reds, I like to use purple. I think it draws a really nice shadow. It's a really deep contrast to the green, and I think it really makes things pop. I've been using it a lot in my fantasy models and my Kingdom Death models to add extra contrast. I'm starting to bring it over to my historical models too. And as you can see, I think it gives a nice cool shadow, pretty realistic looking shadow to the cloth. I think it also, if it's becoming a little too purple, you can go over it with another glaze of green and it will kind of tie that color in with the rest of the tunic. But here I'm just, again, hitting the darkest areas, the creases in his tunic, places beneath his arm and armpit, things like that. And we'll get a nice, easy shadow. So here you can see I'm going over into the model now, again, with that green glaze, hitting any areas where I thought the purple was a little bit strong, and the glaze will bring it back down together. A glaze is a great tool in any painter's arsenal. So now we got most of the model finished. We knocked out the skin tones. We knocked out the tunic. I also kind of like how simple these Irish models are. There's not a lot of ornate detail to them. So here we're just taking the Vallejo model color range, and we're using the steel, the silver, and the aluminum from that to create our lowlights and highlights. It's not going to be too tricky. Tempted to do some non-metallic metals with this, but those still take me quite a while. And, I was wanting to finish this guy up. I've been spending about an hour on him thus far, so we just decided to do our normal little metal paint job. So I put down the steel. I'm taking silver here, and I'm running it across the front of his helmet, hitting the tops and all the way down his kind of nose protector on his Spangen helm here. And I'm also picking out a few areas just right on the side of the helmet that I think light would be hitting. Since it is a curved piece of metal, you would see some reflections, bright reflections there on the side, on kind of the apex of the curve. And then to draw out some higher contrast, I actually am taking a dark blue mixed with a black. This is not a metallic color. This is just kind of a glaze that I made. And I'm hitting the areas on the axe and the helmet where I want to draw some shadows. So I wanted to tone down some of that silver color I put all around the helmet and draw some contrast. And then I'm also taking just some pure white. And I notice on the axe, there's kind of some rough features on the cast of this axe. So I'm using that to my advantage and making it look like some chunks were taken out of the axe. So I'm just kind of drawing some dark lines and then putting a white line beneath it to look like, again, and it had lost a chunk of it. So now we're just going to paint all the leather. And for this, I'm going to use pretty much the same color for all the leather areas on here. I'm using that kind of burnt umber color we use for skin tones. Just kind of recycling that because I had quite a bit of it on my palette. And I'm going to be using the same color for, the string on his necklace and for the handle of his Dane axe. And I'm also going to take this color and I'm going to mix in a little bit of black and dark blue. And I'm going to paint his hair with this. I'm going to go with a kind of very dark-haired Irishman, almost they call him a black Irish. And we're going to hit all of his beard with this. And we're going to very slightly highlight up to have a nice dark brown color for his beard and hair here. I think that will contrast well with his green tunic. So once we have that base color down, now I'm just taking that pure burnt umber and I'm going over that really kind of black brown color, hitting, using the side of my brush to catch all the texture on his hair. And then instead of using some white to highlight up, I took a little bit of yellow and mixed it into the brown. And there I'm just going to touch the high highlights around his hair, the ends of his beard and his mustache, and anywhere where there's like strands of hair that I can actually pick out. And with that, his hair will be done. So for his little pendant here, I did decide to do some non-metallic metal. So I just took a brown, mixed in a little bit of yellow to make kind of a mustard color, took just regular Naples yellow and went over that. Then I took a little bit of white, mixed into that Naples yellow to make kind of a brighter yellow. And then I just touched it at the top with some pure white to be an area where some light is reflecting. And then for the rest of the leather, we are just going to do kind of like almost a red leather. And I'm using the highlight color here to make some texture on his pouch here. Often kind of leather gets worn, especially around the edges. And so just making, again, some little patchwork, some little striations. It'll look nice and worn. And so now we're painting the shaft of his Dane axe. And for this, I'm going to do kind of a lighter brown, a yellow brown. I want to kind of look like varnished pine. So we are using that pretty dark brown as our base. And then we're going to start mixing in some yellows and ivory in there to make our highlights on the Dane axe shaft. So as you can see there, I mixed in a little bit of yellow, a little bit of white, have kind of this mid-tone brownish mustard color, which I'm going to layer on the top of the Dane axe. We'll leave the underside, that dark brown, to represent kind of a shadow. And then I'm going to take some white and mix it into that brown to get a really light brown color, which I'm going to use to make the grain of the wood. So I'm just going to take this, water it down quite a bit, and just run lines down the shaft of the axe just to simulate, again, the wood grain that you might see on a nice piece of pine. And with that, we're done with our axe. All right, and I decided I wanted a little bit more to his tunic. His Tunic is so simple. This guy is supposed to be a noble after all. So we'll give him a nice little pattern at the bottom of his tunic here. Just a nice little gold band of cloth that goes around it. So I'm just taking just a kind of that mustard color, a little bit of brown with some Naples yellow in it, just to draw our base color. Then I'll take some pure Naples yellow, hit the highlights just to give it a little bit of pop. And I think that will help make this guy look a little bit more noble, a little bit more above the common soldier. And I'm pretty pleased with how this model turned out. It took me about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I think I put up a pretty nice quality historical model here. I really like Footsore models. I think they paint up really well. They always have pretty dynamic poses. And I always like the fact that the hands and the face and the facial features are always pretty good on these models. The face and hands on a lot of historical pewter models can be hit or miss, but Footsore does a pretty decent job. And I also appreciate that Footsore carries some more of the obscure historical lines. Like, there's not a lot of companies making dark age Irish models. But anyway, I had a blast with this model. I will be painting up a few more Footsore miniatures here in the future. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe pick something up from this video. If you did, please hit that like button, leave a comment below, subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Take care.